Good evening. Nice to see you all here again. Thanks for coming and thanks for coming back. And tonight we're going to partly pick up where we left off and partly launch into some new themes that will give us a view ahead of some things that are coming after we take the break next week. Just to remind you, we do have a break next week, and then the weeks of April are our last weeks of the class. I meant to ask him, darn, he's gone. I meant to ask him. He put us back all the way to the 30th as the last class. And I think that's adding, he moved us back, but I think he actually added another class too, because I thought it was 5 or 6. Yeah, but so 2 in this month is, and then only 4 in April. If we end on the 30th, he said, so that would be like 5 in April, wouldn't it? Sorry, should have brought a calendar, but I didn't. Okay, well, let's just go ahead and get the class started, and hopefully, pardon me?
There's 5 Wednesdays.
Yeah, so that gives us 7 weeks. So, oh. I guess I'll have to talk to him about what more he wants me to talk about. Okay, so aside from this housekeeping, we'll do some other ones later in the course of the presentation. I remind you that today's course is Feast of Passover, God's Power Paradigm. This week we're going to talk much more about the power of the blood. And it is, of course, the key and central purpose of Passover and connects to everything in the Bible if you get started on it. So we're going to get a small start on it tonight. Okay, so last week we learned that our unusual God's very choice to make more sapient beings, beings that could understand and communicate, to share his existence with him, required a plan for creating and sustaining them throughout their lives, right? Since he was decided in his mind, he was going to form them in his image out of the dust of the earth, right? And to breathe his breath into him and them, that they might live. This was only part of the purpose, though, because he wanted to be able to, as we see early in the Bible, he wanted to be able to walk and talk with them on earth. So when the plan was started in the Godhead, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, they had conversation in the way that they can, which may be beyond words, but they agreed that clearly they wanted to be able to have more company. That's what we talked about last week. That actually they didn't need company. They had themselves and they were complete. But God the Father definitely decided that he wanted to have sons and daughters amongst those who would be on the earth. So he also fashioned systems in their body then that would allow this life that came in with the breath to flow as they moved about, as keeping him company. He gave them a circulatory system, right, as part of those systems. And that circulatory system contained blood, which flowed to every part of their bodies. Okay, so here we come with the theme of the blood tonight. The preciousness of the blood They had no clue. They didn't know much about anything, right? When they were formed, they had lots to look at and discover in the garden that God placed them in. But how precious the blood was revealed very soon. And that was right after Adam and Eve came together as the first life-bearing couple. So, Eve, Adam gave her that name when the Lord took the rib out of his side to fashion her. And he called her the mother of the living. So, right away, it took only one generation for the most devastating consequences of men exercising their free will as they desired manifest. In a fit of pique, if that's an unusual phrase for some watching or listening, a fit of quick anger, a fit of something over something that you're not happy with. Don't even take time to think through why. Don't even just react. And that's what Cain did. Cain was the first son of the couple, and the second child, Abel, was the one he killed. Does anybody remember over what was the issue? Why Cain killed Abel? Pardon me?
Their sacrifices. Because God was pleased with Abel's sacrifice and not his.
So when they were put in the garden, they were asked to tend the garden, right? Their parents, Adam and Eve. But there were many things besides ground crops. There were all kinds of animals. There were many representations of the glory and the beauty of God. But there had been enough of a transmission of the purposes of God, his desires for them to oversee the garden and to work there. And so when the time came to offer a gift of thanksgiving, a gift of a portion of what they had, Cain picked it from the ground of his labor. He picked it from the crops that he worked from the ground. The difference with Abel's offering was Abel was tending sheep, and he gave of the sheep the living animal that was in this pattern and theme that would come as these works went on. The father, you see here, by Cain killing the second child, Abel, this shed Abel's blood on the ground from where it cried out to God for vengeance, right? Because Abel was innocent, put forth his best, and Cain truly believed that what he gave was appropriate. Would you mind if I asked you, Pastor Ken, do you have a special take on why it was that Cain's offering didn't satisfy? Why it didn't neat muster?
Yeah, usually there's two reasons I give. Number one, he didn't do what God asked him to do. And then number two, he didn't give his best. He gave kind of what he thought. He gave what he wanted to give, but not really what God had instructed. Where his brother gave everything. He gave God what he wanted and gave it full measure.
Okay. Where did the instruction come from that you're speaking of? Because
we taking it from the text, the fact that that Abel did something completely different. It's just kind of implied in the text that they knew what to do, but Cain decided he was going to do what he wanted to do.
Okay.
And I often equate it to other portions of scripture. They're very clear, and we know what they are, but we I'm going to do what I want. I'm going to give God what I want, and I'm going to do what I want to do. And when we do that, we're committing the sin of Cain. That's not what God asked you for. You came up with that. Right. And so that's why his sacrifice was, there's lots of different reasons that people give, but that's one of the ones that I tend to focus in on is when God asks us to do something, he wants it done his way, right, not our way, because he has a reason for that. And it appears from the lead us to the text that from God, the way God talks to him, that Cain knew what that was. Because his brother got it.
Yeah.
But he was like, yeah, I kind of want to do it my
And
way.
did that relate to that interesting phraseology about you know what to do, and if you don't, sin is crouching at the door?
Mm-hmm.
That came in before. Yeah. We will have some opportunity to talk about how it was that sin was crouching at the door when we get more deeply into the array of the satanic elements that came into the picture increasingly to interact with men and women. But anyway, so I bring this up this week because I want to delve into the first Passover. We talked about Passover in general as a feast last week. We talked about other feasts, a total of 7 called the Feasts of the Lord, that eventually the Lord will roll out, that will actually in one way or another give a picture of Jesus Christ and his fulfillment of those feasts when he comes first time and second time. Okay, but for tonight, let's learn more about this incident that I'm talking about and others that will come along to show you just how important men's blood is to God. Because again, if his aim was to have men and women, and they needed those systems we just talked about to sustain them, and blood was part of the life system of men, you could take it for granted, it's just part of me, part of what I am. But blood had a tremendously greater meaning. Okay, let's go. Okay, so first of all, I want to be clear. Sometimes you'll say teachings regarding, sometimes you'll use another word, but I use precepts here for a very specific purpose. Precepts are, they're not exactly rules, but they're guidance for you. And they aren't necessarily if put in the form of commands, but some may be. But they're really trying to give you either a moral compass about something and what should be done, or simply more framing around an issue or a type of behavior so that you'll understand better what God desires. And just to tie it in with what God says later in his word through his prophets, He asked, one of the prophets is asking for God, speaking for God, how will they know what I'm trying to speak when what they need to learn is line upon line, precept upon precept? In other words, people who are not tracking with the Word of God and the Spirit of God to develop their understanding and get it all grounded and rounded by different considerations, they need the precepts. Because at some point, you'll come to a place where your life, it gets in a jam, or you really are walking out too far from God's boundaries, and you can be in big trouble. And if any of you have done any kind of counseling or help for someone in that situation, how do I give them all this to bring them where they can respond? And that ends up leading to much longer term counseling, of course, which there are some people who are good at catching people out. I'd like to believe in most circumstances I've been able to help people some, but line upon line, precept upon precept means it's building, it's filling, it's well grounded in the foundation of the Lord and built up with different facets that give you boundaries for living. Okay, so I bring up this again, this occasion where Cain is shedding the blood of the second son. And the precept now that we learn here is the voice of your brother's blood calls out to me from the ground. Who knew the blood had a voice, right? This is one of the tremendous revelations of these early passages. But I've not heard too many people talk about this, and I think this is really important too. God also says, you're now cursed with no yield from the ground. We're talking about being in the garden. We're talking about this happening. This is at Genesis 4:10. You are cursed with no yield from the ground because the blood has been received by the ground. And this crying out for vengeance is coming. Now, this is just a tiny foretaste of what will happen as men's adventures on earth continue forward and do this and that and hurt themselves and neighbors and all that. And it just gets worse and worse. And the blood going into the ground, if there's no intercessor, which we now know, some of you may have done prayer for communities where there have been mass rioting or where there's been big, murder cases or situations. All kinds of ways the flesh of men gets stirred up. And if they go from individual, which is hard enough, because when he says, you're cursed, the voice of your brother's blood calls out to me. It's God who's hearing this voice. Okay? So if you can imagine, I sometimes just think about what it would be like for a father, God, looking for companionship and, walks with and talks with people he cares about. And then suddenly, just like that, it turns bad. Bad for them, bad for the whole enterprise, and bad for God's heart. But this whole course is fashioned to shape the developments of those things and show how God uses his initial power. And this is a hard one. People don't like to hear this one, but he uses the power of removal for Cain. And Cain says, this is too hard for me to bear. You know, I'm not going to have any way to. And God helps him, gives him a mark, so he won't be hurt by anybody else as he goes out. But the blood is still crying out, right? Because there's been no intercession on the earth. So, again, when we're coming at it from this direction, we're basically saying it's because of the design, the plan that God made, that this becomes the situation. I mean, if he'd made them with, I don't know, think of some other substance, or, I mean, maybe there would have been other kinds of things, but for the design and the plan of the Godhead, they chose the blood, and we'll see a little more about that in the next slide. But God gets more explicit with Noah and his sons when they're commanded by God to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. We know what happened with the shedding of blood and the increase of violence on the earth, where it got to the point where God said, it's so, the thoughts and intents of man's heart are only continually about the things that cause harm. And I liken it to, man had options, man preferred himself. Okay? Though God extended himself, God said that he was holy. He was different, set apart. And he wanted set apart, family, company. But by doing it that way, that's, again, it's almost like creating them with blood called for a response to that voice, and creating them men made in his image called also for a response by the Godhead itself, because no one could deal with this. I mean, they could band together and kill each other and that stuff too. But this is why, what I'm speaking of this week is why Passover was necessary. And these are some of the link pins. So as it went beyond individuals, even though they began to move out, to multiply, they could spread away from each other, man once again preferred himself, we know, right? He preferred himself and a lot of other people with himself to build a tower to heaven, right? So that's what happened. Instead of going out to multiply and fill the earth, no, we're going to hang together here. And yeah. So now we have this, I mean, it seems laughable in our eyes, that you could try to build something that would go to God's abode, but they were made in God's image. They had minds, they had wills, they had ambitions, they had lots of equipment, and it wasn't as corrupted as it got to be as time went along, when they got to this point where Noah had to be asked to help. Thankfully, as God says, he found someone righteous in his generations. I believe that's the phrase. Noah's father said, "This is Noah. He's going to give us rest from our labors." Did you know that? That's what he said, because Noah means rest. But who would know the kind of amazing thing God would do to create that by bringing all the animals and everybody into the ark and setting them on sail.
It's
Yes.
interesting, that passage in Genesis 9:2, that it talks about them not eating any meat that has its lifeblood still in it,
Right.
in the blood. But then I just happened to see this, I've never seen this before. God says, I will demand an accounting for human blood that's shed from every animal, which is interesting. So if an animal kills a human.
Oh, so it wasn't animal to animal he was talking about. He was talking about animal to human.
It says, I will demand accounting from every animal.
Oh, okay.
And then from each human being, I will demand accounting for the life of another human being that's taken. So if an animal. So how does that work in heaven? That'd be interesting.
Well, actually, I did also go into those subjects here. My next slide. But I didn't, I waited on the don't eat the blood for this part. Because it does repeat, but it doesn't, this expands it more and gives us a little more of the direction that we're heading. So, continuing with our precepts. God institutes the first earthly Passover in Exodus 12. So that's a big leap, because we've left them moving out and multiplying. But when we get to the week and a half of class, that we delve into the clash of godly and the ungodly, and begin to, peer behind our war is not against flesh and blood, but against powers and principalities, and we get into all that stuff. We'll go more deeply into the territory between what it looked like on the earth, what was going on. Because God does say in his word, well, Jesus said it, as it was in the days of Noah, so it will be. Which is, it just gave me chills. It just gave me chills. If any of you know, I think you've mentioned him maybe, Rick Renner. Rick Renner has just finished publishing a book. Rick was from the South, from Tulsa. But he came up into the Wisconsin area and other parts of the northern tier states at the behest of the Lord for a period of time to do teaching. And he told me that he knew he was and is an excellent Greek scholar, but he had been studying Greek from way, way, way small. And he found that he had to go into tongues. He just felt compelled. He couldn't get there from here. He knew there was heavy weight and pull on his life. I think he had a sense of the worldwide direction he'd be going. And he literally just rolled all the time. His wife and his friends from Bible school would just laugh, because he would always be doing that. Pardon me? Oh, don't get out of the field. Yeah. Hello, I'm back. Anyway, so he would seek interpretation. And as he did that, he would find that interpretation coming in different languages. What he eventually ended up doing was being drawn to go over to Russia. In fact, he started in Latvia, which was at that time behind the Iron Curtain still. And his wife and he, and as they went along, growing 3 children, 3 boys have now all married, and they have wives from over there. And he is just finishing putting the pen to a book that completely opens up that whole arena. And it's a big, kind of picture book and all kinds of details. And everybody's happy that it's Rick that's done it, because he's been in the natural growing a ministry that now reaches all around the globe, and still has a headquarters in Oklahoma, and has headquarters over Red Square in Moscow. It was fun to watch the day that 2 of his old ministry friends went over to see him in Moscow and stood out on Red Square and went, "Would you believe it? Would you believe it? When we were growing up," those of us who grew up in the 50s, 60s, what was happening between Russia and the United States, how could it be? But they did it by going into Latvia first, establishing the first church behind the Iron Curtain in 60 years. And then they began to just teach in every direction and welcome people who came in. And, things don't stay behind boundaries. So he not only just wrote this book, he not only has Greek and text and his own background and amazing visions and walking in the Spirit of the Lord, but he is broadcasting and sharing the book with people in Russia, with people in Mongolia. I laughed the first time I ever saw him in Mongolia. Some guy was in his hut and he had this little tiny, receiver getting his programs. And so it's amazing that, considering that was like 1990 or 91 when I met him, and now he's been involved in going to really see what they really do now believe is remains of the Ark. And it's fascinating to watch him. But all of these things, all of these developments are off the explosion of potential and things that people have in their minds and possibilities. We know what some people who've been out for their own purposes have done. They've done a lot of things. And some of the businesses, at least, have been somewhat helpful. But here we are now, where we are at a place where God is cresting us from about that many years, back to the 90s up to this point. Many people are just hitting their stride going into ministry. And many of those have been in very different lifestyles than those of us who lived in the 50s and 60s, and things at least seemed tamer. Other things might have been behind doors, but they were at least not. So whatever men have faced, we're looking at, potentially very rocking times. Yeah. And so I am going to devote time to getting into that whole arena. But for right now, I wanted to go more directly into the nation itself, because after the Lord had trying to work with individuals, it's obvious that the Godhead took a turn and went toward the nation building way of reaching men and helping them band together for good with his precepts and training and love and care and all the good boundaries that his precepts and things provided. Okay. So by setting the first earthly Passover, the Lord begins to help men benefit from some of his other powers we discussed last week. Powers like the power of creation, power of the ability to hold all things together, the ability to set and start toward a goal and bring it to completion. We talked about there are many powers that the Lord exercised. But as he moved toward bringing men together more, he moved toward what we might otherwise call soft powers, like powers of persuasion, powers of argument, right? Come and let's meet together, and your sins will be, as sins of scarlet will be made whiter than snow. Let's talk this stuff through. Let's communicate. Also, by getting together, they were creating that sense of community, right? That brings more good feelings and generates more ability of men to have common cause for good. Okay, so I wanted to take a look and actually read this week the Exodus 12 account of the first Passover. Sure, I'm using the right Bible. Okay. I'm using here a chronological study Bible. And oh, here it is. Okay. That's not good. They do. It's me. Sorry about that. Okay. So I don't know. Oh, for you who have Bibles, that's great. We're looking at the chapter of 12 from the Exodus. And just to remind those of you who were here last week, and maybe some who may be watching this at some point, that last week we talked about the oh, okay. I was going to tell you something. All right, well, we'll leave that. Sorry about that. Moment. All right, let's just go ahead and go to 12. The Lord has brought the people out from their captivity in Egypt. Okay, so all that activity that was done with the with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and sons that culminated in them seeking food in Egypt through the whole 400 years has come to an end. And that's why I was referring to the downsides and the back things, because that's what we're going to talk in that period. So now here we are. The Lord has brought Moses to a place where he can lead the people out. And here's how he spoke to Moses about the first Passover. Now the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, "This month shall be your beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you. Speak to all the congregation of Israel, saying, on the 10th of this month, every man shall take for himself a lamb, according to the house of his father, a lamb for a household. And if the household is too small for the lamb, let him and his neighbor next to his house take it according to the number of the persons. According to each man's need, you shall make your count for the lamb. Your lamb shall be without blemish, a male of the first year. You may take it from the sheep or from the goats. Now you shall keep it until the 14th day of the same month. Then the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it at twilight. And they shall take some of the blood and put it on the 2 doorposts and on the lintel of the houses where they eat it." Okay, I'll pause there for a moment. They shall take some of the blood and put it on the 2 doorposts and the lintel of the houses. Okay, so let's suppose, let's suppose that this is the door. Okay, so the doorposts and the lintel, which is the above place. Now, some have said that to them it makes like a cross because you're putting one here and one here when you do the doorposts like that. When the Lord makes a way, it produces a door or a window. And to me, in this particular passage, although we know Jesus becomes named as the door, and that definitely is what God intended, I think the Passover opened a window of understanding for the people. Because part of the soft persuasion I was talking about, the persuasive powers, is to bring back to memory, right? How many times do we have great times with friends or family because we bring back good times or escapes from scary things, as this was, right? There will be in a minute in the text. So it's a memorial you're going to hear, and he's starting to create the memory. We're going to have the actual event here, which is why I wanted you to read it, the first event, when it happened. Because it's kind of a simple version. Later you'll get a little more complicated versions with more conversations about the unleavened bread and that they ate quickly, and the bitter herbs that they put on the plates now to remind them of the bitter time they had in Egypt and all that. And we'll talk about that also in weeks to come. We'll get more into the actual feast itself, the practice of it down the ages. Okay, but anyway, let's go back to where we were. Okay, they shall take some of the blood, put it on the 2 doorposts and on the lintel of the houses where they eat it. Then they shall eat the flesh on that night, roasted in fire with unleavened bread, and with bitter herbs they shall eat it. Okay, so the unleavened bread, they had to make unleavened bread because they couldn't wait for bread to rise. They were going to have to get out of. I was trying to think of a good Egypt dodge. Okay, anyway, and with bitter herbs they shall eat it again. This is, this yeah, this is a bitter time, but it's a turn toward something greater. Okay, so do not eat it raw. This goes back to the raw flesh and the blood. Do not eat it raw, nor boiled at all with water, but roasted in fire, its head with its legs and its entrails. You shall let none of it remain until morning, and what remains of it until morning you shall burn with fire. And thus you shall eat it, with a belt on your waist, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand. So you shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. And here we go. For I will pass through the land of Egypt on that night, and I will strike all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast. And against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment. I am the Lord. Now the blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you are. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you, and the plague shall not be on you to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. Okay, I'm going to pause here just one moment, because when I speak of the demonic agencies and the demigods that are involved in Egypt, pastors referred to how the various ones were addressed by the things that Moses did. And I like to get a good look at that periodically. So I will be compiling that again, or finding it again where I've compiled it before, to bring to you, because it is very fascinating, and it gives you a good look into what people in maybe your own neighborhood, but definitely around the communities and in other parts of the world, are still dealing with their Egypt. They're basically in it, and Pharaoh's got them, and but our God is looking to release them all, and coming up real soon, actually. So, yeah. Okay, so I think I also put another one up there, didn't I? Yeah, 12:14. Okay, so all that was up to Exodus 12:1 to 13, the body of the actual practice. Now here's where the soft power comes in. This day shall be to Israel as a memorial, and you shall keep it as a feast to the Lord throughout your generations. When I first read these early in my development as a Christian, I thought, okay, generations, grandma, grandpa, if you think of a few that are around you, and maybe somebody you knew back in history somewhere, like my ancestors came over on the Mayflower, that kind of thing. But this is not that. This is for your generation and everlasting ordinance. So this was from the beginning. This is going to be for you all the time. And this is why I went back to look back before the foundation of the earth, where the lamb was slain last week, because that was done also in anticipation because of what the Godhead could foresee. And they made a choice that the lamb would be slain then. That's why we see a lamb as though slain in the final view in New Jerusalem, when we get to seeing the lamb on the throne. The lamb as though slain. Same figure. Okay, so let's read how he speaks of it. So this day shall be to you a memorial, and you shall keep it as a feast to the Lord throughout your generations. You shall keep it as a feast by an everlasting ordinance. And now here's how he talks about how you're going to keep it when you're out of Egypt and you're out in the wilderness or on into the promised land. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. And that's why in current practices of Passover, they run around clearing leaven out of their house. So they won't have any in their house. On the first day, say, there you go. On the first day, you shall remove leaven from your houses. And they'd still do that, families. Now, some people are cultural Jews. I mean, like, some people are cultural Christians. They're Christians because they're in a Christian nation, or they're Jewish because they were born in a family, but they really are not practicing. But it makes an impact on you. You see people running around doing this practice, right? And that's why it's a memorial. It reminds, causes the children, or even the children who didn't pay attention earlier, the older children, to ask. For whoever eats leavened bread from the first day until the 7th day, that person shall be cut off from Israel. I mean, very serious consequence, right? On the first day, there shall be a holy convocation. And on the 7th day, there shall be a holy convocation for you. No manner of work shall be done on them, but that which everyone must eat, that only may be prepared by you. So, allied with Passover is this feast. You shall observe the feast of unleavened bread. For on this same day I will have brought your armies out of the land of Egypt. Therefore you shall observe this day throughout your generations as an everlasting ordinance. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month at evening, you shall eat unleavened bread till the 21st day of the month at evening. For 7 days no leaven will be found in your houses, since whoever eats what is leavened, that same person shall be cut off from the congregation of Israel, whether he's a stranger or a native of the land. You shall eat nothing leavened in all your dwellings. You shall eat unleavened bread. Okay, now, I think, did the children? Yes, okay. So the other thing I want to note from this passage before we go on to the next material is he builds right into it the children's learning. So here you have in Exodus 12:26, further down the way, when your children ask, what do you mean by this service? He instructs the parents what to say. You shall say, it is the Passover, a sacrifice of the Lord who passed over the houses of the children of Israel in Egypt when he struck the Egyptians and delivered our households. Now, I had asked, Pastor Ken, I had asked the class last week if any of them would like to go to Bethel. Yes. Sorry, that flings me over to Israel, to Bethel, the city. Okay. And Wayne did, wanted to consider that, right? And I did. Kathy, did you think you might?
I did, and Sally.
Sally, okay, and Sally. And Sally was the one that had another class too? Right, she's in Crystal's class as well, but she wants to partake in that. Okay. Walt, you want to come? If we go?
I'm with you, babe.
Oh, and that's sweet. Yay! How about you, Alex? Would you like to?
Yes.
Okay. So I actually tried to get the number for Bethel. I seem to be working on things like this at all the wrong times to call easily to the church. But I got the website up and I got a number but I didn't get through to anybody or any connection. Maybe, I mean, it was probably about by the time I got through the thicket of fending off things that were trying to send me this way, that way, take me to the United Reformed Church and show me this lesson, do that.
I can send you Rabbi Bina Wing's email.
Oh, that would be
You could
great.
probably just email her
That would be great.
questions about when they're doing it, when they'll be in it.
Okay. Because I had talked to Bonnie, I believe her name was. She was another lady that came with the rabbi.
Okay.
And I asked her then, should I call you? And she said, well, don't call right away. We really don't do things that much in advance. She said, just call later when it gets closer to the time. So if you could do that, that would really help.
Yeah, the best thing is just to, I'll get you the rabbi's email and just email and say, hey, this is what we're interested in doing.
Okay.
And you give us,
right.
Okay, and you give us time and place when you do.
Right.
Hold your Seder service.
That's great. I will do that. Thank you very much. So anyway, so again, for you to remember, this would be, okay, now I'm going to maybe need a little help here. Just like in the Christian world, we have the different Reformed churches and the First Church of this and the, long living and still here Church of that. I mean, we've got all these different kinds of subgroups. They have different kinds of subgroups, and this one is a Reformed, right? Their church is a Reformed.
They're Reformed. They're conservative.
Judaism.
It's a conservative synagogue.
Right, and so different ones will do it differently. So I'm not sure how theirs will be. Sometimes they just do a bare outline and they do the questions the children are supposed to ask according to the little, it's called a Haggadah. It's a kind of program, if you will, for it. It touches on the way this is described, but it may amplify in different areas. And it definitely goes in to what are called 4 questions, which are what the children ask in the course of the, part of that built-in memorial practice. If you go to some other synagogues, they may involve a lot more reaching out into the world, acts of service and other things where they're reaching out for we're doing this because our God motivates us to do this so we can make a difference in the world, so the blood doesn't have to be shed continually, which they're all very sensitive to right now. So anyway, so I'm not sure how much of a conversation I should have on that, or just find out what time it is, and we'll all find out if you're okay with that. I think it would be good, if you don't mind, I do have some extra paper, if I kind of got your phone numbers so I can get back with you. I mean, we can touch base, but we can't next week because we have the break. So it wouldn't be for 2 weeks. That's still, it should be before that. But if I'm going to get us on their radar screen, I should. What I needed last week, I didn't have really for sure is how many. At least at this point, I would have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm not sure about the young gentleman that was here. I think he was considering the other class too, and I don't know if that's
I think he's in
still going.
He's in the men's meeting tonight. I think.
Okay. Oh, okay. All right. So, okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Pastor, were you going to do that, or?
I'm going to try and do it, yeah.
Okay. Did you want us to include you with our class, or do you want to do that separately?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Very good. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, Miss Sally. Okay. All right. Very good. So Now, clicker. Okay, I had gotten a start on this last week, and we sort of ran out of time to flesh it out the way I had hoped to be able to do it for you. Because though we brought up these 7 feasts, Passover being the first, you now see unleavened bread, right? The one that he spoke of. And then first fruits is, let me give you a big hint, what Jesus became when he came and fulfilled that feast. He was first fruits of a harvest that occurs during that time period. And I would go in more depth, but then there become two harvests, and I want to keep it simple tonight. But he fulfilled being the Passover lamb, the lamb that takes away the sin of the world. He fulfilled being unleavened. He had no sin to leaven his life. First fruits, he was, do you remember what he said? He said, unless a kernel of wheat falls into the ground, the harvest can't come forth. And that's what he was referring to, was the harvest. And then the Feast of Weeks gets kicked off through this period. But that also is a little more complicated to explain. And I'm trying to develop my own thing that includes enough detail without getting crazy that can put these things in relationship. And I think it's going to take a core with some extra, I don't know, I'm working on it. We'll get it down. Okay, but anyway, so back to here. Just so you remember, Passover was also called Pesach in the Hispanic communities, the ones that settled to the north and west and to Spain and so forth. And Feast of Weeks became known as the Passover went round and round and round for years and years and years. Finally, there came that year when Jesus became the first fruits, and he told them to go wait in the upper room, and the Holy Spirit fell in fire. Okay, so that was a fulfillment of the Feast of Weeks, which basically relates again to something that kicks off during the earlier part of the Passover. 7 weeks of 7 plus 1 is what happens. 7 weeks of 7 that is involved with what's called the counting of the Omer. And again, that's like deep weeds. I'll see if I can relate these things to you. I like to have the things we talk about relate to something that you'll use. But anyway, that's the first 4. And then, so they start back here, right? 3 or 4, Passover varies a little bit. I just used 4 as that's this year. It's on the 4 part of the clock I'm using as the representation of the 12 months of the year. It's only for being able to explain it more easily. Passover could start as early as March. It does in some years. But this year it's in the 4th month. And so it would be the 4th month of the Jewish calendar, as God said. But the Jewish calendar is based on the moons, and ours is based on the solar system. So that's why there can be some variation back and forth. Okay. In the summer, there's another harvest. There's another time of harvest. The early one back here is a barley harvest. The later one is a wheat harvest. And in the fall, when they come to take in the goods of the ground and all the wonderful riches of the land and all that he promised out of the promised land, the trumpets begin to blow. Now, you may be getting a lot of sideways jazz about Trump being a trumpet and, it's signaling this and signaling that. And praise be to God for anybody who's actually able to keep that all straight. But it does start with the sound of trumpets. And if you're so fortunate as we are to be located right across Cranston from a neighborhood where a friend of mine who was a long-term missionary person had a big trumpet. And when we first moved to where we live now, I would hear, I would just know that it was a trumpet being blown. I don't think he does that anymore. I don't think he's able to do that now. But when I first learned of this, I only had a little trumpet, one of those lamb's trumpet, which you use for the bleating of a lamb more than a big triumphal thing. But I would blow it every day. I'd try to get into the feeling of the things. Yeah. And the blowing of the trumpets is literally to make everybody come to attention and get them ready for the Day of Atonement, which is Judgment Day.
And so they know, so you're referring to shofar.
Yes.
Shofar.
Right, there's two kinds. The one that's real big, the big ram's horn. I got one of those eventually, but at first I only had a little one. And it made me giggle because I knew it was like a child. And I knew that I would go like that.
Easier to play the big one.
Yeah, I felt like I didn't really see visions, but I kind of felt like I was in a Dr. Seuss book that I read to my kids. Who hinklers and two tinklers and woo. But I was serious. I wanted to be in sync. So anyway, all right. So various kinds of blasts are done at this time and in various series. I had a friend who was a worshiping warrior, and he actually asked the Lord once, what kind of blow was blown when they made the walls of Jericho come down? And the Lord told him, there's, some blows you go, do, some blows you go, do, 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 do. Another blow, so different kinds of blows. Well, that's pretty cool. Talk to the Lord about it. Okay, so they lead up to that day, which we know from the Old Testament was the day when only the high priest could come in to the temple. Okay, and that was because he was making the sacrifices, the blood, the presence needed for the whole community of Israel to be cleared of its, load for a year. Yep. Okay. People I know, I have a good friend, in fact, right now, a really sweet Jewish lady. She's sweet and salty though. Sweet and salty. She knows that it's really important for everything to be buttoned up, and many Jewish believers feel this. They go around doing all kinds of good works. They go around doing all kinds of, let me resolve this with this person. They try to bring enmities or disagreements, things that keep them out of joint from being at peace with one another. Everybody's running around doing that kind of stuff because they're trying to stand in the best position before God, even when they're not, really religiously observant. They know the sense of it. Yes?
Do they do that within the Jewish community or even beyond the Jewish community?
They do it within Jewish community. But if you mean, do they practice it like in different nations and different?
No.
No.
Like with Gentiles, would they go
Yeah.
make it right with Gentiles, not just their own?
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
I see what you mean. Okay. That's a good question. I don't know.
I would think mostly within the Jewish community.
Mm-hmm.
That I'm right with my brothers and sisters in the Jewish community. Could be outside, but I would think their first thing would be, because the Jewish community is such a tight-knit community. So if there is a disagreement, kind of everybody knows it, and sends a ripple through the Jewish community. Like if you think of the Jewish community here in Rockford, it's not that large.
Right.
And so most of them know each other. So if there was some, so-and-so and so-and-so were at odds with one another, the whole community would feel that. And so I think it's about keeping, certainly in that day, would be about keeping our community in unity and unified.
But I will say that especially with those types of backgrounds in the Jewish community, where their connection is with a much more world comprehensive picture, they really believe themselves to be agents of creating change and making things right. And they have certain phrases to describe that. But some of them are very active about teaching others and involving others. And as I shared last week, Walt and I were involved in a Seder in this community not long after we arrived. And they just reached out and said, "Do you want to come?" Sure. So, am I getting close on time?
Yeah, 14 minutes.
Oh, good. Because what I wanted to do was complete this with an awareness. I wanted to complete your awareness that beyond the 7 feasts of the Lord, which are what I was trying to show, the last one of which is after Day of Atonement, when everybody's made right or not, or whatever's going to happen. In the week and something, I believe, after that comes what's called the Feast of Tabernacles. It's the most wonderful, the most beautiful feast of all. It's a harvest feast. It's full of good food and good times. Basically, you get together in booths, which can be as simple as putting some curtains up in your house. When my kids were younger, I did that. I just put curtains over doors like our living room, and then put things up and put, fun and workable. But the more traditional form is people actually get usually wood from the from lumber and create a structure which is a booth which you keep open at the top. And the idea behind this is like the Israelites were out in the wilderness and communing with the Lord. And that's what it was. It was like a week and a few days of having the greatest of times. And to telescope it into you, as the most fun I ever had was with a friend who was Christian, but she really enjoyed learning about that. And decided, and she was an interior decorator, so she could get all kinds of, curtains and all kinds, and she put up these beautiful curtains, put out a radio to play music, and the music of that time is fun because it's about dancing and enjoying being with the Lord and with each other, and she would work it so you could go out in her backyard and come into that and enjoy it, and then come back in the house and eat, get warm, whatever. Sometimes it was cold, sometimes it was raining. We did it for many years, and it was such a blessing. And she made such an impact in her neighborhood because she wasn't Jewish, but she loved the Lord. And so I would go over there and dance and, wave flags and have fun like that because I like that. And we'd sit and sometimes just be there for a while. Would I take you there? Yeah, okay. So do you have a memory about it that you'd like to share?
No, it's just really cool.
Well, when you have a good hostess or any, people are good at providing a little bit of food, a little bit of just a fun talk, a husband who knows how to use a kerosene lamp so you can get it warm when it's really cold. That was Wayne. He helped us with that. And Wayne liked it too. So anyway, I bring that up because that's the last of the 7 feasts of the Lord and prefigures, right, the coming day of judgment and the Lord catching us up to be with him. We will be with him. And so it's very doubly joyous for Messianic Jews and Jews that know the Lord and know that he came one time before. Yeah. So I wanted to add these last week. That's where I ran out of time. Purim was happening like the day after last week when we were here. But it's the story of Esther. And so a really excellent way to enjoy Purim during the time of Purim, if you don't actually go to a synagogue, but you can. They're usually pretty open. Most of them are. They like to teach. But anyway, you read, that's one of the elements of that celebration. You read through the book of Esther. This year, Alex and I read through the book of Esther. And Alex prompted me to remember that one of the things that they do when they read the book of Esther is every time Haman, the enemy of the kids will go, boo, or, they've got these little, kind of noisemakers and stuff like that. So everybody makes a big, disapproving sound. And you'd be surprised how many times that name comes up because he read and I did it. And I was like, but anyway, the other thing about Purim is because Esther gave a feast. This isn't a fasting celebration. This is a feast. They gave a feast, right? She gave a feast for the king. She gave a feast for the people. She gave, feasts of all kinds. So the kids and the adults like to dress up. And that's why I had the clothes on I had on last week, because I was supposed to be talking about Purim, that I had the long festal garbs that I had. So now I call it a biblical feast. That's to distinguish it from the feasts of the Lord that the Lord requires of everybody, of all the males to come, especially the 3, the Passover, Passover, 1, 2, 3. I guess it's Passover, unleavened bread, and tabernacles. But anyway, the point is there are 3 big ones that he required everybody to come. And so they'd have to, that's why all the people were there. So it's Pentecost time, right? That's why all the people were in Jerusalem from all over. It's because all the males had to come in from all over. Okay. Purim is biblical because the description of Purim is in the Bible. And it's in that sense I use biblical. Hanukkah is also a biblical feast from the standpoint that Hanukkah was a feast of lights, it was called. Also a feast of dedication was another name, and that's how you find it in the Bible, where Jesus was at the feast of dedication, walking in the courts when he spoke up about the light. Because the Maccabees, a group of Jewish fiery people, were very unhappy with the empire that was what century? Well, anyway, people who had put their heel down on the Jewish people, and furthermore had done bad things to their temple. The Maccabees, as a family, rose up and helped throw the Greeks out. And when they went to relight the menorahs, the lights that would be in the temple, they found they only had enough oil for one night. And so by faith, they lit it up. And every day from that point through 8 days, which is why you get 7 branches as opposed to the usual menorah. 8, okay. The usual menorah is 7. The one for Hanukkah has an 8th. Because that's what they're celebrating, that the lights remained lit for 8 days. So you can read about Jesus and Hanukkah connected if you look under Feast of Dedication. So I think that's all we're going to get to tonight, because I'm told we are on the edge. So let me see what else. Oh, look at that. Thank you for coming, for viewing, and listening.